Hello YouTube, this is Cornwallis with another strategy video. This time it's not a real strategy, it's more of a guide and my 2 cents on how to play America. I started on the Pacific side of the board because that's always a discussion. Are you going to go for kill Germany first or kill Japan first? When will you be at war? Will it be on the first turn? So does Japan do a J1 attack or not? What does Germany do? Will they buy the standard fleet buy of sub-destroyer carrier? Or do they do an all-land push? So a function of that, of course, your buys can change, should change. But nonetheless, I have a reasonable, good idea what to buy, what to purchase on the first turn with USA, as to give you options on turn 2 or 3, regardless of what Germany and Japan do. Because as a US player, you're often pushed by your allies to get an action very fast, most of the times too fast, and then you lose your fleet too early. United States should help the UK, ANZACs, and all the other allies as fast as possible, but in a coherent way. What will I buy the first and the second turn? So this is my purchase for the first turn. So a carrier, 2 subs and 2 bombers. And for the second turn, I will buy a destroyer for the Pacific side, 2 infantry, 2 transports, a fighter, and a sub and a destroyer for the Atlantic side. So my basic idea is to have the 3 bombers ready to fly to England as soon as possible, and have a fleet in the Atlantic ready to prevent an eventual, or if Germany decides to go with a fleet by on turn 1, to go to Gibraltar on turn 2 and then threaten Canada, the East Coast, or maybe to go into the Med later on. So that's why I buy this. So the basic idea is to be prepared for any scenario. So what I find very particular is that the US starts with 4 mechanized, so 3 in central United States and 1 in San Francisco. I always wondered, why is that? And I think Larry Harris, he thought this very through. So okay, yes, America is the most motorized nation in the world in the 1940s, but that's not the only reason. I think because what we regularly do is we go to Gibraltar or Morocco, and then from there on we threaten Norway, Italy, or wherever. In my previous video on the Sahara Express, I demonstrated you can easily go from New York, Washington, to the French West Africa, and then it's only 2 turns to Egypt. So chucking units from the west coast to Sahara and then onwards to Egypt is a very fast way to get fast movers into Egypt if necessary. On the other side, on the Pacific board, I strongly recommend to keep 2 fast movers in San Francisco. Why is that? Because Japan can very easily send an annoying transport from Season 6 to Alaska, taking away not only 2 IPCs, but also a bonus. Keeping 2 mechs there, for example, allows you to have a counterattack, 2 mechs or a tank, but you usually have air in reach, but not land units. So if you have 2 mechs in Washington and San Francisco, they can always reach Alaska. So maybe keep 2 mechs in reserve. What will I do the first turn? So if these units are still alive, I will of course pull them to direction of Hawaii. So we can all push these 1, 2, 3 to C zone 23, or even to C zone to the Solomons. It doesn't really, not to Solomons, to the Gilbert Islands. It doesn't really matter. And the fighter, he can be picked up on Wake Island. Most important is we will chuck units from the west coast to Hawaii. Up, and the transport here will return. What you do with the fleet here, it doesn't really matter, but I would, of course, combine them, send the carrier here, pick up the units there, battleship, also to Wake Island. I will not send all my units there. I need the destroyer and the cruiser and the tactical bomber. They will go east to the East Coast, and we'll land there, they can go to sea zone 89, and we take the mech, and he goes all the way there, accompanied by the infantry. So, at any given time, the transport on turn 2, he can take 2 infantry, go to Hawaii. The idea here is to build up in Hawaii, or yes, in Hawaii. And if declaration of war starts, not to rush down here. You can do it with your fleet, of course. Why not? It depends on what Japan does. But I always find a good idea early on to send a transport with a cannon and an artillery and infantry to Iwo Jima. Take Iwo Jima. It's -1 for them, +1 for you. So in the long run, it pays off, the transport that you will lose. And it offers you a base. If Japan doesn't react, you can, on full force, go to Iwo Jima. Even from there on, you can continue bombing Japan. If you can build an airbase or a naval base, you can reach other areas. You can also return very fast to Hawaii if you have a naval base. So it offers, it puts a certain threat on Japan north, and they need to react from there, from the Philippines, because what they usually do is they build a naval base in Hainan. From there on, they cannot reach Iwo Jima. The idea here is we have these units here. We build our carrier, put a fighter on. Voila. Build our 2 subs. And we buy the 2 bombers. Of course, they're moving him forward. Voila. The idea, if Germany goes with a fleet to Gibraltar, we can attack with 2 subs, a destroyer, 2 cruisers, 3 bombers, a fighter, and a tactical bomber. So basically enough to wipe German fleet there. As you can see, we probably won't have enough to go to 91 and have a defensive posture there. That's correct. Why do I move the cruiser? Because how many times have you used a cruiser for a bombard in the Pacific? I think once. You already have you still have a cruiser left, plus a battleship, so you can support a full transport of guys for an eventual opening fire, a bombard if you need it. Here, if you have 2 cruisers, it puts more pressure on Italy, for example, threatening Italy, threatening Rome. If you can lie in Gibraltar, it offers more defense. So that's why I sent 1 cruiser and destroyer. Yeah, the reason obvious, because I didn't build one, and I certainly need one there. So that's the idea there. What is also useful, if Germany tries to go for a sea line, you can do what I think it's a hand grenade or a young grasshopper calls the London Calling video. So you can move these units 102 if necessary to do your counterattack on the fleet if necessary. So this buy offers you a counterattack measure. If the Germans go all in on Russia, then of course you can join with the British and go to Gibraltar. If they buy airbase on UK2 or whatever, it gives possibilities. Concerning the fleets, why don't I buy 2 carriers? Because I think it was Corporal Clergy. He said that, yeah, the more bang for the buck, if you want more bang for the buck, then you need subs and destroyers. So that's why I find the purchase of subs and destroyers very good. So that's why in my second buy, I buy 2 destroyers and a sub, and the consecutive buys also have a certain amount of subs and destroyers. This gives you a certain convoying tool as well here. The idea is to have the subs go into the Med, start convoying, so put 1 sub 105, maybe 1 to 125, and then slowly starving Italy from supplies, conveying him to death. Have the destroyer, of course, is to clean up other subs, excess subs. So that's why every buy from now on will have at least 1 sub and a destroyer for the Atlantic side, and at least 1 destroyer and 1 sub from US turn 3 on in the Pacific side. So you have a continuous stream of subs and destroyers on both sides. For the second turn, why do I need these 2 transports? That will give me 3 fully loaded transports. You can say, yes, but you have Brazil to take. That's correct. If I need to take Brazil on turn 1, I can send my lonely transport, activating that. If I do it on turn 2, no problem. I send 1 transport, and I will already send 2 fully loaded transports, SWAT to Morocco, SWAT to French West Africa, and then on turn 3, we can check units further on. So that's basically the idea. I don't give a lot of information about, yes, where to put every unit, but that's of course because US is a reactionary player the first turn, so it depends on what the Axis player do. So my keynotes are, so turn 1, be prepared to counter a German fleet in 91. Be prepared to reinforce the UK with 3 bombers. Those 3 bombers, if Japan declares war on turn 2, so if they don't do it on turn 1, they probably do it on turn 2. You can send 3 bombers to London, start bombing fleets or other factories or other units, but then you have at least a 3 bomber threat for Germany and Italy. You have fleet ready to go to 91. You have subs and destroyers who can start making their way to convoy. You have loaded transports to go to French West Africa, to go to Morocco. So you are prepared for everything. Even in a case of sea line, you already have your first steps to go to 100, 102. You have bombers ready to threaten a German fleet. So you already offer some direct pressure with the 3 bombers and some indirect pressure with the subs and the destroyers and the carriers. On the Pacific side, slowly build up. Don't rush. If you leave Hawaii too early to go down to season 54, yes, you can put pressure on Japan player, but a good Japan player will threaten Hawaii. So if you vacate Hawaii, then you basically cut yourself off from your supply lines. So my idea is to go to Hawaii, build up Hawaii, maybe take Iwo Jima with a suicide transport. A good idea might be if to build a naval base on Midway. From there, you can go to sea zone 19. Another special idea might be to build a naval base on Wake. From Wake, you can go to San Francisco. From Wake, you can also go to Queensland, so 54. And from Wake, you have 2 routes to Japan, so he needs to put 2 blockers. So that might be, is it worth the investment? That's up to you. But I tried it once. The results are, yes, I could go to Japan, but from there on, I threatened Japan. So that was that game a good move, but it's not always a good move. It depends on the Japan player as well. So that's my basic idea here. Slowly build up, snatch an island, but if you do snatch an island, you will lose a transport. So always have another transport ready for some opportunities. Anzac player must play together with US. So my Anzac player here, they will buy turn 1 a sub and say 4. Take Java, that means they have 18 on their at the end of the first turn. Turn 2 buy 3 subs. That means that they have 4 subs at the end of turn 2. So basically they will reinforce America with their subs and with their fleet. So combining their naval force. That's it for today. Please leave comments, leave your ideas, for example. So I'm not advocating these strategies are the best. The idea is to restart the debate on the forum. So please leave your comments in the comment section and see you next time.